the field of artificial intelligence, AI, machine learning, and deep learning. We'll look at the conceptual framework of how all of these things fit together, and then we will look into specifically machine learning, deep learning, and some examples. And if time permits, we'll go through the detailed demos also. So that's the agenda for this talk. And maybe if you have some questions in between, I think Saif bhai, if they can post it on chat, and if we can help coordinate that, that will be great, so that we can.
Yeah, I'll try, inshallah.
Okay, thanks a lot. Jazakallah. All right, so what is basically why we are talking about this, and very pertinent topic of today is where is this AI economy, as it is called, is leading. So this is some of the statistics that I'm presenting, just sort of to set the context in terms of where the AI stands as far as the economics and market is concerned, so that we get the feel of the why so much importance is now being given to jobs related to AI related expertise, and so on, which we'll talk in due course. And we'll also talk about career opportunities, how to get started, and everything. So this is the report produced by Stanford University, that's called as AIindex.org. So in this, the last report, 2019, they mentioned that from 2012 to 2019, the overall job in AI grew from 0.3 to 0.8%. Considering the overall job includes like mechanical industry and all of this is a big jump actually. And secondly, there is this big momentum in terms of the investment that goes into startup ecosystem. So as you can see, from 1.3 billion in 2010 to 40 billion in 2018, like 40 times increase or so, has this increase, an annual growth rate of over 48%. And what are the areas in which this investment is going? Of course, the one of the key visible example of AI that we often hear in news and whatnot is the self-driving cars or autonomous driving. Tesla is having their autonomous driving. Other companies like Google and other companies are experimenting with their versions of the self-driving cars. And this increased, this is like phenomenal increase. The numbers are there in front of you. And the other, obviously, other areas where AI investment is going is in drug, cancer therapy, facial recognition, surveillance, video content, fraud detection, and finance. So finance has been like one of the major examples where the AI is being used because of the enormity of the data and the various dimensions of the data, as we'll see in due course in during presentation. That investment has been increasing, and these are some of the areas in which it is going in. And even like all the businesses, they may not be like call themselves an AI company or AI startup. They are actually adopting AI in some way or some function or some fashion, and that is like increasing day by day. So that's the overall status of AI. So let's start by looking at what is an artificial intelligence at the conceptual level. So at a very high level, very loose definition is something machines thinking and acting like humans is basically, you can call it as an artificial intelligence. So there is this formal definition that is actually most of the literature you will see is that the art of creating machines that perform functions that require intelligence when performed by people. So as human beings, we perform certain tasks like recognizing object, driving the car, reading something, understanding something, having conversation, and all of this, which are like many of those tasks we do effortlessly without conscious effort on our part. But for machines, even they do that thing. That's what we can call it artificial. Most of these tasks, the challenging thing is the perception related tasks, where we need to say image perception or language perception or sound or speech processing, and that kind of a perceptive tasks. So this is what actually forms the goal, you can say, of the artificial intelligence. And then there is but what is the intelligence when we talk of artificial intelligence in computational context? Is basically it's the ability to achieve goals in the world. So we have certain goals, like we are trying to drive, we are planning to go from point A to point B. So that's our goal. So and there could be various levels of goals in between. We say if you're driving, you could basically, you're just not having this objective to reach point B starting from point A, but also not to have accident, follow all the traffic rules, make sure that your tank is full, and so on and so forth. So these are the kind of various objectives and goals that we as human beings, we don't think much about it, and we just go about it. But these goals actually are very important when we are trying to basically have something reasonable artificial intelligence. Because if you just give a map to say a self-driving car and say, hey, here is the map, you go, and then of course, without intelligence of how to avoid crashes, follow traffic rules, and so on and so forth, they won't be able to perform those things. So these are like the dynamic goals. We do not actually specify how to specify these goals to machines, and things could change it. Maybe what happens if the car breaks down on the way? What's the remedy? Are they supposed to call the service? Are they supposed to fix that it themselves? Are they supposed to diagnose it remotely, and so on? So this is like a dynamic objectives, this intelligent task involved. It's not like if you have studied operation research and the similar fields, it's like not okay, maximize the profit or minimize the loss. These are the variables, these are the objectives and equations that you form, and then you end up with some optimum set of values for your input variables. That's like a static one. But this is a dynamic. You, even the one who is trying to set the goal for AI, won't even know what are the things that going to face. So it should be able to think like humans. It should be able to think like rational. It should be make the rational decisions and act like humans. Like humans usually acts like, say, based on, say, feedback loop. We always take the feedback. Hey, is there a traffic? We see the traffic that goes in. Okay, if you are speeding up too much, okay, now slow it down and move on. And so then also you have to act also rationally, which doesn't harm, which makes sense. So that is what the goals of the basically the artificial intelligence. But machines also need to have these goals. These are our goals, and we know that. We don't explicitly state that. So that's the high level goal of artificial intelligence. Starting few slides may look a little bit of a theoretical in terms of conceptual, but that's important, and it will become more clear as we go deeper into the concepts. So how do we know that if something is really an artificial intelligence? So in 1950, 1950s around time, Alan Turing, the famous theoretical computer scientist, came up with this Turing test in his seminal paper. And basically what this test says, say you have a computer and you have a human responder, and the interrogator, that's the player C in this figure, basically doesn't know in which room the computer is and which room the human responder is, and then he asks or interrogates various questions, and then he gets responses. But this interrogator is now not able to distinguish in which room the computer is and which room use the human being is. That's like, you can call it as high level Turing test. So it is kind of, you can say that the computer or the software or the machine is passing kind of a Turing test. So of course, in order to do such a Turing test, what we need is basically the computers with the ability to do natural language processing. Because first, if you are asking the question, you should be able to understand the question, right? And once you understand the question, the computers or the machines should be able to represent. Basically, it should be able to store and process, basically convert that speech signal, if it is in terms of voice, or if it's like text commands, you should be able to understand that and process it and store it. And next is the automated reasoning. So if there are like questions, can you draw the conclusions? A is a brother of B is a brother of C, is A is a brother of C, for example. Now, is it like kind of, this is very simple inference, but there could be very complex inference, right? If there are like, say, names of, say somebody says Mr. A has two children, one boy and one girl. Their names are Jane and Joe. So what is the name of the boy? So this is would need basically a lot of understanding of the gender related names and so on and so forth. This cannot be simply represented in the form of, say, decision diagrams or if else loops, or you cannot just write rules and get to it. So it needs to have this automated reasoning capability. And as I said, machine learning needs to be there in terms of understanding circumstances and detect and extrapolate patterns. So it's all about detecting the patterns, that you understand, okay, this is how the sentences are formed, this is how the things are related to each other, and then you can make inferences. So all of these four things would be necessary in order to pass the Turing test. Of course, we are not completely there. Right? There are many conversation systems, like for nowadays you got Amazon Echo, Google Assistant, and so on so forth. But when it comes to, say, the example that I gave about inference, they may not be able to make sense of that. It's just more like an intelligent search engine. But Turing test demands much more than that. So that obviously involves the field of AI. It's interdisciplinary field. So it started with, we'll see briefly the history of it. So it has strong roots in philosophy, mathematics, psychology, and obviously computer science and engineering, because that's where the lot of processing and decision making goes, and then the linguists. So all of these are basically the fields in which the basically AI is built upon, and it's continued to evolve from there. So here is the brief history of AI. So it is as old as the history of computing itself. So basically, if you look at the first computing 16 mechanical calculating machine 1642, can go through this diagram, but basically major milestones is this 1915's Alan Turing test that I just defined. And then basically 1955, there was a conference that basically coined the term artificial intelligence. And then there were various milestones in terms of, okay, like creating a chatbot. So it was as old as 1965. So they were like creating chatbots which can converse with the people and so on. Then the first self-driving car attempt was made in 2009 by Google, and then there is this automatic vacuum cleaning robot, and then that's basically uh, 2002, 97 again. uh, Deep Blue, the IBM Deep Blue actually beat the Gary Kasparov in the chess competition 80s, and basically 2011 Jeopardy competition again. IBM Watson beats the human contestants. Then this time around 2011 to 14, the services like Siri, Google Now, others started coming, which are like speech recognition system. And also around the same time, the deep learning revolution actually got a momentum. It was not started there, it was started long decades back, but that's when the thing started taking speed. And then this 2014, Ian Goodfellow comes with generative adversarial network. Basically, no more the AI is confined to detecting or recognizing something, but able to produce, say, new songs or new images and so on. So that was the markable milestone there. And then there is another AlphaGo. Basically, this is the Go is the game, very complicated game, very famously AlphaGo, which is the program from DeepMind, defeated the Go human champion. And then, of course, later on, most of the universities started including AI in their part of their curriculum and so on. So this is like a brief overview of how the AI has evolved over time. But nothing was like there isn't like a smooth progression. There were like some downtimes, like in 19 say after say initial hype around 1950s and 60s, people were like in 1960s saying that within 8 years we will have like artificial intelligence. But that of course did not happen. Then there is like reduced investment in AI research or in AI in industry. Then again, it started around 80s with expert systems, which are like rule-based systems and so on. Then again, it went down in 90s. Then again, it started around 2000, early 2000, and actually it took off after 2011. So with this context of AI, we'll look at what is a machine learning. So basically, it's again a type of machine learning. It's type of an artificial intelligence. So basically, it's basically learns to do certain tasks, and its ability to do that task, its quality of doing that task improves with experience. So that's basically what machine learning is. Like you're trying to do certain tasks. As and as you get more experienced, you get more data in this case, you get more training in this case, you basically become better at doing that things. So so this is another same definition given by this famous AI scientist Herbert Simon. Learning is any process by which a system improves performance from experience. So what could be the task? So what tasks are we talking about? It could be classification, like, okay, cats and dogs. There are pictures, recognize which are cats and dogs. Very simple. From that to, okay, can you basically recognize stop sign? Can you recognize, say, speed limit signs? Can you differentiate between regression problems? Okay, this is my GDP data or finance data. Can you predict or can you estimate what could be the GDP next year? And that could be regression tasks. So basically, you're trying to predict some numerical value, some problem solving, planning, control. So even say planning, scheduling problems are heavily in 90s used in AI, was used in scheduling, right? Nowadays also, basically to allocate resources, government resources, or in big industries, how to allocate resources, how to schedule production, and so on. So AI is heavily used in that. So what kind of basically machine learning types? I'm sure if you have read enough, at least some introduction online, you would get these three types being talked very. So just for the completeness sake, I'm including it here. So three types of the machine learning is supervised learning, unsupervised, and reinforcement. As you know, supervised learning is where you have a teacher with a labeled data teaching the algorithm, teaching the machine to say classify certain tasks or to become good at predicting the future value based on the data. Example is email spam detector, which have a training set which is already labeled emails. Unsupervised learning, here there are no labels, there is no teacher, you got to figure that out. So that's what machine does. It's a clustering task, like similar document based on text content. Say say news articles are there based on say sports, finance, politics. If it is able to classify or cluster them together, that's a clustering. Here you are not giving any labels, but the algorithm itself figures out, okay, which are the documents that are closer to each other and which are documents further apart. The documents closer to each other forms one cluster, and that's what it is for it. It doesn't understand sports or anything, but that's the distances it understands between the similarities. And another exciting area, there is a lot of research that is going on, is the reinforcement learning. It's based on what is called as Markov decision process. If you heard about Markov chains, it's based on the same theory of the next state being only dependent on the current state with a given probability. So which is used in PageRank and other places also. So here, for example, like you playing a game, or for that matter riding a car, these kind of problems where there is not like a very well defined data, or either labeled or unlabeled, but you work in terms of reward and regrets, and basically with that feedback loop you take an action. The machine learning algorithm takes an action, sees what's the impact of it. If it is in a positive direction of the goal, then it continues with that. If it is not, then it backtracks and comes up with a new policy. So that is what the reinforcement learning that comes in. So it's like playing chess and so on. So this is the overall structure of deep learning. Now moving on to deep learning. So we saw very high level what is an artificial intelligence. It's mainly related to perception tasks and adopting tasks. And then there is a, like inside it, there is like machine learning, which basically improves with the more and more data or training and so on. And then there is a part of it which is a deep learning. We'll see what deep learning is, but it's basically modeled on or inspired from human brain, how human brain learns. It's not exactly the model of the human brain though. It's inspired, it's loosely inspired based on what we know how the human brain works. As of now, science hasn't figured out as to how exactly human brain say do the vision task or understanding or speaking or any of those tasks, but based on what we knew basically in past many decades, based on that scientists have come with the different models of how we can utilize some of those things and become at better and better in those perception tasks. So that's what the deep learning is. So so it's a part of machine learning field. Just to get more onto deep learning, that runs the important part is learning representation of data. As we saw in a Turing example, you have this speech samples, you have this language samples, you have these images, and what computers or machines would understand only the pixel values, which is like maybe RGB values and so on, the intensity values. So how do you basically represent that, and how do you basically learn the new representation of that? So we'll see slightly more detail when I talk about the learning representation, what basically it means. And then it uses the learning algorithms basically to get the meaning from that data in multiple layers. So as also for the human brain, so it also has like multiple layers. And when you're recognizing an object, for example, one layer basically just recognizes the age, one layer maybe forms a more complex shapes, and finally you recognize, oh, it's a person, it's a face, it's a car, and so on and so forth. So basically, this is what the learning, which is really the exciting field, and a lot of that research and everything right now seems to be going into that area. So this is the human neuron, the structure of human neurons. So this is the nucleus. The axons are basically connected to other basically neurons, and this is like a huge neuron network of more than 10 raised to 10 neurons are there in human brain. Uh, and you actually model that as a mathematical function. So how does that work? So these neurons are connected by this something called as axons, which is like a muscle which carries certain weight in terms of its intensity. So when you're learning actually through the deep learning model, you're actually learning the weights of this neural network. So weights for neural network to recognize cats from dogs would be different than, for example, weights that would recognize, say handwritten recognition. And of course, there are certain concepts where there you could actually transfer some of this learning from one learned neural network to another neural network. But the whole idea is basically that you learn these weights from a training, and after that learning happens, these neurons are actually getting fired based on the input weights. We'll see an example on this, then it will be more clear. Quickly, briefly on the history of the neural network, deep learning basically. So again, 1958, the basic perceptron model that I just showed you came up with had just one neuron, for example. Then there is like criticism of perceptron. Okay, can it learn all the representation, so on. Then important milestone 1974 is the backpropagation algorithm. Basically, how the neural network learns is by this algorithm, backpropagation. In 1998, there is this convolutional neural network which has revolutionized actually the field of neural deep learning, especially for the image recognition or computer vision tasks in 1998. But actually, it did not took off, as I said, till 2011 and 12. And and there is in between this SVM, which is support vector machine. It's not a neural network, but a machine learning or statistical machine learning technique which got the prominence, and somewhere deep learning got the backseat because SVMs were like very popular. United States Postal Service started using SVM for their for their zip code automated recognition system, and so on. And then the Google Brain project come up with 16,000 core machines, and so on. Then actually 2012 AlexNet. So there is this competition called as ImageNet. So ImageNet is like millions of images which are labeled, and they launched a competition every year there during that time to basically, can you come up with a better neural network that could have a least amount of errors, that could recognize, say, there are 1,000 or so categories in those. It's like regular images like objects of everyday objects, cars, bikes, and flowers, plants, and so on and so forth. And can you recognize those objects? So 2012, they actually surpassed all the previous benchmark using convolutional neural network. And that's where actually people started getting more and more into deep learning or convolutional neural network. And that's when actually the thing started off. So how does this basically different neurons basically, let's look at the step by step. So for example, say you have like input as an image which has like a lot of you can say pixels which are having the intensity values of different colors. And there could be many examples. In this example, say this cat example is there. Then what you give this as input to the deep learning model. And as I said, deep learning model basically this. So x1, xn are the input pixel strengths. So say any 20 by 20 by 20 by 20 pixel, a 2D image is there, then there could be like 400 pixel values. So this 400 pixels values will form as the input, and there is one bias input as well. And then this is your neuron. So what it basically does is does a weighted sum. So what it basically does, whatever the pixel value x1, it multiplies with the weight value w1. Same it does with the other input. X2 multiplies with W2, and Xn, the last value, with Wn weight, and then adds them all of that. Now you might ask, but to start with, where does this weight values come from? So these are basically randomly initialized at the beginning when you instantiate a neural network. And basically, once this is summed up, there is this non-linear, or you can say activation function, which basically takes this sum value and and applies it to such a way that the output is between 0 and 1. And that's basically tells you if it is, for example, a neural network to recognize cats. If this sum comes to say closer to 1, then it's a cat. If it is below say 0.5, it's probably not a cat. It doesn't know what it is, but it definitely thinks that it's not a cat. So this is the basic idea between how the learning happens. So you have these input values, and then you basically these input values are added together through a weighted sum. And then there is this sigmoid, which is the basically the activation function, which basically squishes this output between the value of 0 and 1, and based on that you get an output. Of course, then there is error, because when you're learning, since you initialize the random values and you are taking the input, of course it won't it won't be able to detect it's a rightly cat or not. So it will have some error. So if it is a cat and it says that there is like 0.2% 0.2 value for the cat, then there's a 0.8 of an error. So error is fed back, and this is how the error is fed back. And based on this error, these weights are adjusted, and that's where your back propagation algorithm comes in picture. So basically there is algorithms such as gradient descent and stochastic gradient descent actually helps you to get these weight values and optimum values of this weight values, so as to minimize the error. So your objective is basically to minimize the error, to select such weights such that your error is minimized. And that's what all there is to the back propagation. So in the first step, you feed forward. In next step, you do a back propagation. And this process is repeated over and over and over again, and you basically learn the weights. Now this learned weights, this learned thing is what is your representation. This is your representation of the cat image in terms of this neural network. Think of this as like your compressor. So you have a file, you zip it, it's the same file. I'm assuming it's lossless compression. It's the same file, but it's another representation of the same file. The sizes are different, maybe excuse me, if you open it in a notepad, you will see different characters. So but it's the same file. If you unzip it, you will get the same thing. So that is what the learned representation is. So you're learning to represent the cat image in terms of a neural network's weights. That's what all there is. And as I said, based on the values, it will output whether it's a cat or dog. Why it is called deep, by the way? Basically, deep means it has more of the layers, because we do not have one layer or one neuron, but there is like many more layers stacked together. So usually like more than 3+ layers is called as deep. If it is less than 3 layers, so this is the picture here. So this is like input layer, then there is layers of neurons, and then there is an output layer. So there are like many layers. So why these layers? So basically, as I said, every layer tries to learn some aspect of the input image. Here we are just talking about example image just for the understanding purpose, but it could be your speech data, it could be your tabular data, it could be your CSV or Excel file data. It tries to learn some aspect of it, and the another layer tries to learn certain other aspect of it. And this is very loosely compared to how our human brain actually recognizes, or our human vision system works, or how our eyes detect something, how our brains detect something. So there are like layers which basically forms different aspects of the input image. And basically that's what creates the entire representation of that. So this lot of these weights and other things, weights and biases and other operations that I mentioned, they are heavily based on the linear algebra or matrix algebra, as you might recall from your college days, is based on that, which needs a lot of heavy processing. So the graphical processing units, which actually made this computation faster, it's one of the major reasons why actually deep learning took off. This most of the algorithms, I mean, CNN, the image recognition, so do Jan LeCun actually discovered it way back in late 90s. So the method, the algorithm has been there, but what made it possible is the fast computation power delivered by, say, GPUs from companies such as Nvidia, which could actually, they were basically made for the gaming and other kind of simulation kind of applications, but they found that even for these kind of applications they were suitable. And that's when around 2010 it actually took off, that why not use GPUs to train your neural networks, because it has to lot of differentiation. So basically, if you remember from your optimization classes, operation research classes, basically you are trying to basically minimize the error, which is a kind of a loss in this figure, and you are uh, mi- uh, minimizing the error given for this arguments w0, w1, w2. So you are actually taking the derivatives with respect to error, and basically you're trying to minimize the weights. So that involves lot of differentiation and lot of calculus. So GPUs are really good at doing such kind of a matrix computation. So that's actually made the deep learning possible. And as we learn, so many people actually in the scientific community call deep learning a cascading learning or hierarchical learning. You learn in terms of hierarchies. So what are the challenges that we see for the AI? Is all and good. It's happening right now. People are using it. It's been deployed even right from law enforcement, surveillance to fraud detections to your mobile phones to basically categorize your photos, tag them, and so on. But what are the challenges as of there today right now? There's something called as a data and algorithm bias. So what I mean by this bias is different than the bias that I showed in the diagram of a neural network. So this bias is basically, for example, say you have fraud data, bank fraud data I am talking about, or say loan default. Another great example, loan default. So you are building a system for, say, a bank or some financial institution, and basically that system is supposed to decide whether to give someone a loan or not. And the input to that system is basically the characteristics of the loan applicant: its age, gender, name, living zip code, annual income, how much credit it's currently he already has taken. And this is the information that is given to the system, and the system then tells, okay, this person or this corporation is likely to default. It's going to basically run away or going to sink, so better not give loan, or yeah, it's credit worthy. So how do we do that? So that's the system that we built. Now what if the training data, now suppose we decide to do this application using, of course, the supervised machine learning. You take a lot of labeled data, and most of the people do pay back loans. There are only very few cases, unfortunately, where they fall short. Now if you take such a data, and it happens that, say, a person from particular ethnicity or particular, say, zip code happens to default, and that is part of your data set, then that's what your supervised machine learning algorithm is going to learn, and that's what it is going to predict. So here you have both data bias as well as the algorithmic bias, because your data is skewed in favor of, in against the favor of certain group of samples, and in favor of certain other group of samples. So that's the data bias. Algorithm biases basically happens when you tune it in such a way, because there are various parameters and various ways in which algorithms can be tuned, and there are concepts like overfitting, underfitting, such that it basically is tuned to basically lean towards one way or the other. It could be unintentional and it could be very well intentional also, because after all, this is the people who are programming these things. So this is one of the biggest challenge, to make AI fair and transparent to all the stakeholders. So that's basically the biggest channel. A lot of research is going right now, going in terms of how can we make the AI systems less and less biased. There was one system I came recently during one of my research work, which is basically used to basically decide whether to give some prisoner parole or not, and it takes a lot of data in it, and basically it helps the judge uh, to make that decision. Now imagine if it is biased. I'm not saying it is, but imagine that if it is biased against under certain racial profiles, if it is biased under certain people from certain area of the city, right? And that could actually have the impact of making a bad decision worse. So this all needs to be taken into account. Another challenge, as soon as people started developing from universities to say industries, okay, how do we deploy it in production deployment, because these systems needs to be continuously updated, continuously upgraded, and how can we make it successfully running. So there is, you might be knowing DevOps, as it is called. There is something called as a machine learning ops, basically deploying your software to the production so that it runs perfectly, it runs with little downtime, and it is you are able to upgrade it as and when you need, without bringing it down, or with a minimal downtime. You can be able to monitor it if something is going wrong, from security perspective, from your capacity planning perspective, and so on. So there is a whole big field of DevOps. Same principle of DevOps applies to your machine learning models. When you deploy into productions, it needs the same care that you would need any other system. So how do we do that? So that's again another field of research, and a lot of work is happening in this area. You might have heard of containerization and Dockers, and there is like Kubeflow, which basically help you build the machine learning pipeline and so on. Ethical use of AI. It goes very tightly with the first point that we spoke about, the data and algorithmic bias. How can it be more fair? Another important aspect is, with the fairness, is interpretability and explainability. Okay, I applied for a loan and my loan was denied. I go and ask the bank why my loan is denied, and they say, hey, we have a machine learning system and they says you are not credit worthy. But that's not good an explanation. I specifically want to know, is my credit not good because my say and my salary is low, because I have already so much loan on my account? What is the reason? So can you explain that reason to someone, right? So that's what the explainability piece part comes in between. For the challenge actually comes in terms of neural network, because they are a kind of a black box model. If the neural network says it's a cat or dog, but if you ask even the person who is developing it, or even the leading researchers of this field, why your neural network thinks it's a cat, or why your neural network thinks there is a cancer in this x-ray, or in this CT scan image, or in this kind of medical test, why? No, there's no, they can't give you a satisfactory explanation, because if doctors are using this system to diagnose an illness, then they need the understanding of why the system thinks the way it is thinking. And it's hard to explain for certain models, easy to explain for certain models. For example, decision trees. So it's basically simple if else kind of a trees you can think of. Like you say just let's take the example of the loan default thing, and say you basically are like building the system using simple if else kind of a decision tree. So if you say, okay, if salary is less than this and loan amount is less than this, then check for if there is already existing credit. If not, then maybe deny the loan, and so on. So this is very interpretable. You can read that thing, right? You can make a sense out of it. This is a very, very highly interpretable model. You can explain. Some customer comes to you, hey, look at this. You already have so much loan already in your account, or maybe your you are already late in your existing, say, monthly payments of loan and so on. That is interpretable, that is explainable. But if, as I give example of the neural network, that's not the case. So that means, and that's probably one of the reasons why, for example, highly regulated industries like banking and finance, or for that matter, say medical diagnosis, while the neural networks have shown a great promise in terms of accurately detecting, say, a disease type and so on, they are not that much basically relied as much they should be, because of some of these reasons. That how can we explain the results, or how we can interpret the results. This is again active area of research. And then questionable use in surveillance. So like face recognition system, you might have heard in certain countries, basically certain places this is used to detect people of certain ethnicity, okay, to surveillance them, to uh, 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 basically they are actually compromising their rights to privacy, and so on and so forth. Weapon system, guidance systems, and so on. So it's being used for these kind of purposes also. So that actually begs a more uh, higher level questions as to, is AI is put to right use? Are we exploiting AI for to take advantage of someone? Another that is term. So earlier people used to call something that could think like humans, act like humans, an artificial intelligence. But there is now this concept, okay, is it like a general intelligence? Because the image recognition system would just recognize image, the speech recognition system would just recognize speech. But is there like an artificial general intelligence as good as human being, or maybe better than super intelligence? Is it better than human beings? What happens if that happens, right? Is it going to be like that movie Terminator? Is it like the existential threat to humanity? You might see leading researchers as well as leading entrepreneurs or industrialists have a very different and polarizing views on whether it will be good for humanity, whether it will be not good for humanity. But that's a bit of a long term. But yes, that's, you will hear in the literature the discussions around AGI. So AGI basically is artificial general intelligence, and then the super intelligence. But many people called it as a singularity also. So these are the high level challenges that AI faces from practical aspects as well as from futuristic aspects. Okay, now a little bit switching gears. So before I switch gears, any questions so far? Anything you want to bring? Any comments so far? I'll just take a pause a minute. Saif bhai, are there any questions? Are you there?
Hello.
Yeah. Any questions? Anything?
Yes, Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam.
Sir, my question is that what is the effect of batch size and epoch in our model? Kindly give a brief introduction about batch size and epoch.
Okay, we'll come to that when we look at the deep learning model. I will explain, try to explain basically what is the batch size and what is the stochastic gradient versus the gradient descent, and then we'll cover it. It's a little bit uh, it's a beginner topic, but it's a little bit getting more into the widths of it. Sure, we'll cover it. Okay, any other questions? All right, moving on. So what are the job roles? So there are job roles like data analyst, data engineer, data scientist, ML engineers. So so data analyst is basically, you're like a business analyst who is doing a more of a data crunching job. So more of working with softwares like Tableau, for example, a business intelligence software, reporting software, building dashboards, driving reports, and doing some actionable intelligence from that report, and so on. That's the data analyst kind of role. You can think of this as an entry level role for data scientist. Not necessarily, but many people think of it that way. Then there is a data engineering role. This is the highest growing role in the science and machine learning field. These people are basically responsible for data cleaning, data acquisition, data cleaning, data munging, data visualization to some extent, and making sure that your data pipelines that are built, which does the data acquisition, cleaning, and so forth in a right way. So that's what the data engineer and data scientists, which are basically building the models along with the machine learning engineers, which is a combination of more of what I've seen. Again, these definitions are not black and white, and depending on the size of organization that people work, they could be doing all of those things or they could be doing one of those things. So ML engineer is the one who is building machine learning model, doing hyperparameter tuning, and so on and so forth. So as I said, so this is the report that I got from dice.com, which is a job site in US. Again, this is US representative data, but it more or less reflects the global trend you can get from that data. As I said, data engineers has the highest growth, year over year growth, and then there is like senior data scientist and so on and so forth. So what are the interviews basically when people go for the interview? So what kind of like skills they are like being asked for? So some of the skills are like SQL for data analysis or for even for data scientists, very important skill. Algorithm, understanding of algorithms. Python is a go-to language. Then there is some statistical A/B testing, machine learning system, probability. All of these are like important. And then usually you will get a take-home test. Okay, this is the problem. This is the data set. Okay, this is the time given, say 2 days, 3 days, or maybe a week, and then you have to come back with the algorithm that outputs certain accuracy or certain parameters, which they will then assess whether to call you for an interview or not. What are the tools? Some of the tools you might have already worked aware of in your machine learning or other software development experience. It's basically the Python, R. Julia is another upcoming language, but Python and R kind of like default languages. ML framework, scikit-learn, basically for Python, and Carrot for R, and there are many other tools in R also. And this list is growing. DL frameworks, deep learning with TensorFlow from Google, PyTorch from Facebook, and then from cloud side. So nowadays people are doing more of a only cloud native development. So basically that has like Azure ML Studio from Microsoft, AWS machine learning, Google Auto ML. So instead of like you writing code for all the model building and so on, how about say codeless AI development? You just drag and drop, or you just input the data, and then the system figures it out what algorithm to use, how to run it, and so on. That is the automated machine learning. Guys, can you go unmute if you're not speaking?
அப்படியா சரி பரவாயில்ல நான் ஒரு half an hourல வந்துடுறேன் நான் எங்க வீட்டுல இருந்து வந்தேன் வந்து நான் கண்டிப்பா.
And then there is tools like SQL, Tableau, Apache Airflow, Hadoop, Spark. This is mostly used by the data engineers, like building say data lake, data warehouse, and so on and so forth, big data systems. And this tools is continuously evolving. So now there are major algorithms that initially we saw, like classes of algorithms like supervised machine learning, unsupervised, and reinforcement. So what are the like within the supervised machine learning, for example, what are the most used algorithms in the industry? So still it is linear and logistic regression, almost 84%. So it is the old statistical technique from 50s or maybe older than that. Just because now your computers getting faster and more easier to do, but it still rules that your linear regression is basically when you have a numerical output to predict, and logistic regression when you want to classify something. And then there is a decision trees, random forest, and gradient boosting. So this is again a data from Kaggle site. So if you know Kaggle, they actually organize competitions where they give data set and problem, and teams work over a period of time, and this actually they give cash prizes and so on and so forth. And then there is a convolutional neural network, Bayesian approaches, RNN, and so on. So still the conventional machine learning methods are prominent in the use. The deep learning methods are still below, say after third or so. And this is a 2020 report. What are the frameworks? I mentioned few frameworks. So scikit-learn again rules for those regression and classification tasks that I mentioned, and many more. Then there's a TensorFlow also is prominently used. Keras, which is again a deep learning framework to make the consumption of basically deep learning models easier. XGBoost, PyTorch are again symbol learning method XGBoost, where you combine weak algorithms and then utilize them to make certain tasks. Hey guys, if someone has the control, can you?
Hello, Mr.
Yeah,
Vigneshwaran. Can you please mute yourself? Mr. Vigneshwaran, request to mute yourself, please. Yeah, please go ahead, Amirabhai.
thank you. So basically, this is the kind of the usage in terms of the frameworks. Top scikit-learn, TensorFlow. And another thing, when you're starting off, these frameworks documentation has really improved over time. So actually, you could start by reading the documentation. You will get a good hang of the algorithms that they are trying to implement, how to use them, how to implement them, and so on and so forth. You don't actually need any books for that matter. So as I said, Kaggle, so these are like some of the learning resources. Kaggle is they organize competitions. They have some training courses there. Data sets, a lot of data sets you will need, because to build any system, you would need a lot of label data. So you'll get a lot of label data there. And using this, actually, you could build your project portfolio. You could build certain projects and then put it on your GitHub repo, and that could go into your resume. Because even if you do courses from this Udacity, Coursera, and so on, a good project portfolio is always an edge, given that it shows that you are not just going through the courses, but you are actually doing this project implementation. They can then look at those project portfolios. Your prospective employers could look at the project portfolio and then basically make an assessment of whether you're fit for the role or not, or interview. And there are a lot of YouTube channels. I just mentioned like two top of my head. They may not be the best, but as you start learning and going through, you'll figure it out in terms of what are the good podcasts. Because if you're like getting more into deep learning, probably you would like to go with Yannick Teacher. He has a lot of, he does actually a lot of paper reviews, like research paper reviews on YouTube, as well as they have their podcast also. And it's a very informative reviews. He does it really as soon as the paper comes out. Very interesting reviewer. And then there are certain channels, podcast channels like DataFrame for getting started learning. Another resource, DataCamp, is good for both Python and R. They have got like 4-hour modules of, say, you want to learn regression. Here is a 4-hour module. You want to learn classification, another 4-hour module. And Python, there is also for Python. There is also for R. And basically you could learn there, but it is paid one, unlike the other ones which are mostly free. What are some of the books? So basically, if it comes to books, there's a like for this hands-on machine learning with Scikit, so on and so forth, by Aurelien Guérin, the second edition. It's a very good book to getting started with machine learning and deep learning. You could follow this book easy along if you know a bit of a Python, basics of Python. You've done some programming. This is very easy to follow book, not very math heavy. There isn't a lot of math, but he explains the concept, the intuition behind the algorithms very well, and you could really follow this book from cover to cover. The another is similar category book is Deep Learning with Python by Pankaj Chalat. He's the creator of the Keras framework that I mentioned from Google. So basically, it's a specifically targeted as a deep learning. Doesn't assume any background in machine learning. Explains really a very practical way of using deep learning models for image recognition, speech recognition, or natural language processing. These are the two top books I would say for the practically getting started, getting your hands on experience kind of things. And then there is a more theoretical foundation books like Deep Learning by Ian Goodfellow. He's the Apple director, Yoshua Benjo, and others. So this is basically the heroes of deep learning, as they are called as. So you will get from all the mathematical theory to latest research there. Uh, Another book, Machine Learning, a Probabilistic Perspective, very math heavy book, but it builds slowly. So if you really have time and patience, you could spend some time reading this book by Kevin Murphy. Another book that I did mention is Pattern Recognition Machine Learning by Bishop. Very good book, slightly more advanced than I would say Kevin Murphy's book. It's more of a graduate level text, and this Kevin Murphy's is more like a UG text. So both are good. Again, need a patience and time to go through it, but they will be rewarding in a long-term aspect. And if you need to say read a lot of papers, then one or the other such books would help you in understanding such papers, the notations and the arguments that they do. The last one is like When Life is Linear by Tim Chartier. Basically, it's a very excellent book. As I said, a lot of these machine learning algorithms are based on linear algebra, but you are like me who has studied like linear algebra or matrix algebra back in college decades ago, and you want to really refresh the intuition of how actually these concepts are used in the machine learning parlance, and understand, for example, what is the principal component analysis or singular value decomposition from matrix theory, then this book is for general public actually, but it does a great job of explaining such complex concept with pictures, with examples in a day-to-day language without getting really into deeper proofs or mathematics and so on. So I would really recommend to have this book around so that you can refer concepts on and off. The lot of conferences, journals. So as I said, deep learning or machine learning in that sense is a very fast moving field. There are a lot of research every day coming in, a lot of interest from industry, academia, both. So to keep on top of that is a big challenge. So I just listed a few of the top level conferences here. There are many more happening internationally, locally in India and elsewhere. The first one is a neural information processing system. So it is called as a NeurIPS right now. I think it's one of the oldest conferences uh, dedicated to machine learning research, deep learning research. ICLR, International Conference for Learning Representation, ICML Machine Learning Conference, and IEEE Computer Vision and Pattern Recognition. ACM's KDD is Knowledge Discovery from Data, is one of the premier data mining machine learning kind of a journal and conference. And there is ArcSci. So basically it's University of Cornell's preprint system. So these are not peer reviewed. All of the previous ones that I mentioned are the peer reviewed, but this is like you're doing a research, you're producing a paper, and usually if you submit to a journal or something, it takes like months, sometimes up to year and a half.
मीटिंग चल रही है
Come up.
Amir bhai, you
somebody is
can mute. You can mute anyone. You are the host, so please.
How do I do that?
Okay, it's okay now.
Okay, sure.
You can go ahead. Sorry.
No worries. So ArcSci is not peer reviewed. So it takes a journal. If you submit, it takes months and years to publish. So you could actually submit to ArcSci, so people get to look at it. Some people comment on that, and it's really good. So a lot of research papers you could find it on this system. And if you are looking for more of the latest course list and the comparison of the courses, this is the link that I found on a subreddit. By the way, subreddits like machine learning or Ask Machine Learning, which I should have mentioned here, are also good resources. If you want to ask the question, okay, how do I start on this area, or what is the best way to learn this, I could ask on those subreddits like Ask Machine Learning. I'll probably add that in slide and post it again, and so on and so forth. So there's no dearth of resources. If you have patience, if you are motivated, you could actually get started on this. And whether you basically intend to go like a full-time machine learning job or in any software engineering role, I won't be surprised if machine learning is one of the one of the skills that is expected for all the software engineers to know. And then I think these are some of the good resources to get started off with. Any
Okay.
questions?
Yeah, this is Abdul here. Okay.
Mhm.
So from a software engineering or a programming perspective, so what would be the best starting point for a machine learning or a deep learning?
Yeah, so for say machine learning, you could actually go through online blogs and tutorials, and there's some of the books that I mentioned. So this is like hands-on machine learning with scikit-learn. It's excellent book to get immediately starting on this thing. But if you are looking for, okay, I want to build, also understand the intuition behind it, but I don't want to go that much into maths. But I should be able to make certain calls at my work in terms of, okay, whether this algorithm should be better, this is how I should tune it. Then I would suggest at least
no, Amir, my question is not that. My question is like from a programmer perspective. Say for example, I'm from a .NET background. Okay, so I wanted to move to say for example, if I want to move it to ML side, so what will be the starting point from a programming perspective?
So programming perspective, I think you should not learn Python. There are like .NET ML is also there. I haven't tried it, but I have seen some job postings asking for that. So you could actually start learning that. Start doing some projects on that. Build a project portfolio, right? Build some project portfolio. Share it with your colleagues. Ask for the feedback. And basically write blogs about it. Okay, I did this because I don't know if there are a lot of people doing machine learning in .NET, but definitely there are. So there is a community. So you could say, okay, this is how you could do, say, some classification problem, which is like
okay. So in a nutshell, so whoever it be to start with, they have to learn a language which supports the machine language, right?
Yeah, but since you know .NET, I don't think learning a Python would be a big challenge. Anybody who has something, and as I said, you could even do it in C# in machine learning. Available there also. So that's no more. Tools is no more the bottleneck or challenge.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, thanks.
So I would just like to add one more thing here. So this webinar today we are having as a part of ML series, machine learning series. So last weekend we had the webinar on Python, introduction to Python, and today we are having this introduction to machine learning concepts. And next Sunday we will have a webinar on ML using Python and scikit-learn. So inshallah, that is the plan. So next webinar will be on actually doing machine learning using Python and scikit-learn, which was already mentioned in today's webinar as one of the leading tool to do the MLDL work. So next week's is where you will see actually how to go about doing the actual code base and development for ML.
Yeah. Hello, I have a question, Amir bhai. Basically, I have got no background from programming, software, no computers background. I'm basically a mechanical engineer, and with the master's in thermal engineering from IIT Delhi and then PhD in energy conservation. So what I'm looking for is basically very specific learning resource where I can learn how to put AI, artificial intelligence to for automation of the machines, and with continuous data feed happening from, let us say I put in 10 sensors, I want to get the that data. Yeah, so that's the
okay. So some of the areas that I can mention top of my head is basically there is like a IoT related kind of machine learning that goes on. So there is a framework called as TinyML. You could write it down, TinyML, TinyML.
Sorry,
so TinyML, TinyML.
Okay.
So basically, this is the ML framework. So the frameworks that I mentioned, like TensorFlow and so on, these are like heavy frameworks. They need like a lot of computing resources. But for your example, say factory automation and sensors and that kind of a IoT kind of application, you would have a constraint in terms of computing power or memory and so on. So for such devices, what's called is the edge machine learning, which is happening at the edge. This TinyML frameworks provides a lot of more optimized way to program such applications at the edge, cloud and edge computing. So I'm talking about edge on the field, on your production line, on your shop floor, so or on your plant. So there you could do certain things like anomaly detection, for example, like your time series. So basically the data there you are referring to is called as the time series data, because you are like having a reading of say temperature or certain machine or certain sensor over a continuous period of time for say every few milliseconds or every second. So there is like a time series data. So I'm just giving you some keywords to start it for you to get started, or at least what to Google. So start looking at how you can process that time series data, and the use cases would be anomaly detection, right, or monitoring for that matter. And basically how do you implement them, deploy them using this edge ML frameworks. TinyML is one, and another ones, there are so many are there. Basically for the resource constrained devices you could implement it then. As far as the programming goes, I mentioned AutoML, that is automated machine learning, which doesn't need a lot of programming. But Python is a very simple language. So even if you could just do like as I think Saif Bhai just mentioned about a session, upcoming session next week or so, if you could attend that, I'm sure you will be able to pick it up fast. It's not that difficult. If you are interested, actually you could learn Python in a day or two and basically get started with that. Yes, but when it comes to production line deployment and stuff, it has to go through, as you are probably aware, a lot of quality control and quality assurance and testing and so on. Yeah, another area, since you mentioned the word control, that comes to me is the reinforcement learning. Excuse me. So that is basically like a robotics. So robotics, the biggest application of reinforcement learning is robotics. So you learn from environment, which basically you learn through senses, like yours, for example, say robot, which is picking certain thing from one place and putting it another, say from one table to another. Then it needs to basically sense that object is there in their hand. Then it has to move, how much it should move. If the motor moves too fast, it might miss the destination. If it is too slow, it is going to be really slow. Then to what height it should drop, and so on and so forth. You can imagine here lot of sensor inputs that are going in, and based on that, for example, those values, you're adjusting your motor speeds, right? So this is what basically the reinforcement learning tries to address, right? And there is a reinforcement learning actually has a strong foundations from control theory, right? So the like Markov decision process, the rewards and all of those things that will come in that parallel. So this is like two kind of branches that I see based on what your domain that you just mentioned.
Okay, it's like just a brief about myself. I'm into design, and we have got, let us say, 10 different components in a system, and all of those have got a particular soft operating point, means the best efficiency points. So based on the sensor data, we want to operate the whole system and the equipment at those soft ranges. And there, because I worked with the Excel initially and developed some algorithm or some polynomials which could accurately predict those soft points. But then I wanted to really automate the whole process. So I'm not really interested in any certification, but mainly in the the learning resource. And I would would want to develop this this much expertise myself, because we don't want any gap to be happening between, because I could like ask someone else to do this working for me, but then I feel that there will be always some sort of gap which will be left. So I would want to learn it myself and then apply it somehow. So basically what you are saying is I should, and also Amir bhai, there is it's going to have a lot of data every, I would say every
I can imagine. So there are like what you're basically calling is also called as a streaming data. So
streaming data, yes.
Correct. So that's basically streaming data, and there are like various frameworks and open source frameworks like Kafka and so on that are available. So we will have to actually build the entire pipeline,
Yes.
Since
yes.
I mean, I cannot give like you the solution right away, but based on what you just said, I'm just giving high level kind of a plan of kind of a start with is basically how do you capture this data? How do you ingest this data? So there's like softwares like Apache Kafka and so on. So basically that helps you stream this data into your system. You will have to build that pipeline. If you are doing it, say cloud machine learning, then you will have to use say AWS. If you are using AWS, then basically where do you stream it into AWS system, and then from that, how do you put it to your algorithm? But this is again cloud side. But as you said, if you want to take actions on the edge itself, then the reinforcement learning algorithms would be a good place to start. I'm not expert in applying those algorithms to your specific say machine shop kind of environment, but I would basically start looking in terms of how can I formulate that control problem in terms of, as you said, the optimization problem, which is basically your reward. And
Yeah.
there has to be some regret in terms of what if you do not calibrate your output, your action, what is the loss because of that? And that's when it will learn. That's how far I can basically tell you right now.
Where do I start?
So reinforcement learning for control problems is what you can start looking into. And for basically reinforcement learning for your control applications.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And is there anyone with whom I can connect and who can answer any of my queries during this time, if it is possible to share this, or maybe your your idea? I do not know.
Yeah, I would definitely like to help, and also I will look if again my limitation is that I haven't worked in that kind of environment. I worked in IoT environment, but not specifically in the machine learning, the plants environment that you are talking about. So you can connect with me, and if I know someone, then definitely I will help you get connected.
Okay, Amra, you are in the same group, MFIRD?
Not yet, not yet. You can reach out to Saif Bhai, he will route it to you.
Okay, okay, fine.
Yeah, Amir, another thing, like Abdul here again. So will it be possible to have a kind of a SharePoint URL where we can have this document posted?
I will give it to Saif Bhai, probably. I think he will be organized.
We'll have the recording available. So in the chat, we'll give the
what about this PPT?
tinyurl.com/mfird. Today's recording will be available, so you can go through the recording.
So we'll get this PPT also then, or it's only the video?
No, only the recording.
Only the recording. Okay. Or will it be feasible to share the PPT or no?
Hello.
Amit bhai, I have a question here.
Yeah, I can share the PPT.
Yeah, basically I'm a DevOps engineer here. So what is the scope of DevOps engineer within the perspective of AI and ML? Can you just let me know?
A lot of scope, I would say. As I mentioned, there is this ML ops, and you might have heard about it. So basically, ML models are developed. I mean, it's cool to work in developing ML model and tune it and so on and so forth. But when, as they say, rubber hits the road, that's where actually we find the challenges with the machine learning model, and that's where the critical role the DevOps plays, deploying the ML models, right? So these are like, again, this is a software, could be deployed as REST services, depends on what kind of architecture the enterprise is following. So it could be deployed in that, what kind of pipeline, the build pipeline, entire build pipeline, entire monitoring pipeline, entire, basically you can say entire upgrade and patching pipeline. So lot of ML ops work. The frameworks like Kubeflow is there, or MLflow, which actually lets you build this kind of pipelines in a DevOps parlance. So excellent scope for a DevOps, I would say. After data engineer, or as much as data engineer, I could say, for the folks working in deploying the ML models.
Yeah, Jazakallah.
Hello,
sir.
Hello.
Yep.
Sir, I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sir, I'm from a EEE background. So what I've observed is that if I'm using machine learning, means it is an interdisciplinary. Mostly they are trying to approach in that way. So as a beginner, if I've told for a mechanical engineering staff, okay. So I plan to do my research in machine learning in in a smart grid. So how can I start my research, sir? So what is the starting point with the help of machine learning?
A smart grid. So as a part of so I came across some time back, again, you would know your field, but for example, I came across some research happening in the area of how to reduce the leakages, the power leakages, right? So basically how to do that stuff. So I would say, if you are looking from, I don't know, you're looking for academic research or what kind of research?
Academics, sir.
Academics. So I would say do your usual literature survey using the regular resources that you probably are using right now, like Google Scholar, IEEE Explorer, and so on and so forth. And basically the keywords that I would look for is machine learning, power grid, machine learning relay applications in, say, electrical engineering, and that would be a good starting point. And if you have specific problem in mind, where you are basically trying to predict something, trying to classify something, trying to say even optimize something, that would be something that those papers is what I would look for. And from then on, I will go forward. But I'm sure there are a lot of data sets are also available. So you could try and play with some of the data set. As soon as you start getting through some of those papers, you will come across some data sets. So I would say play with that. I think in academics, I've seen a lot of researchers using Weka software. I have used it long time back. I'm not a big fan of it. I would rather use R or Python. I equally like both. So Python, if you start with Python, your scope would basically increase in terms of how much and what you can do. I would suggest you go through those papers, find out the data set, try to reproduce some of those things. And I'm sure with your problem area, you will find some application that you can apply to.
Amir,
Hello?
just can you
Hello.
name any of the books which I can use? I'm again Nadeem. Amir.
So it's specifically for your electrical engineering problems?
No, I am Nadeem. Like the initial, we are talking about that same automation control.
Sorry, I don't know any books in that, but let me look up something, and if I come something, I'll pass it on to Sir.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you.
In general,
Hello?
otherwise, to start
Hello?
with, this is the
Hello?
simplest.
Yeah,
but-
Amit
Hello, sir.
bhai, I have a question that how machine learning and artificial intelligence is being used in cyber security, and what
interesting.
is the scope of a cyber security engineer as far as machine learning and artificial intelligence is concerned. So
Interesting.
if there is any learning resource you can suggest, so please forward it to me.
Okay.
I would be grateful
Sure,
to you.
sure. Actually,
Thank
that is one of my area of research. So machine learning for cyber security. Lot of exciting research happening in cyber security, ranging from malware detection to intrusion detection and prevention. So basically, one of the papers that I worked last year was in the area of network intrusion detections using deep neural networks. So a lot of data sets are nowadays available. You could generate a new data sets also, like you could actually set up your cybersecurity lab and generate. Otherwise, a lot of universities and research lab are putting, earlier there used to be just one data set for like 20 years, but now the other data sets have come up. So that's from intrusion detection side, from malware detection sites. Again, if you go to the Kaggle site also, you will find a lot of resources. Like I'm talking about the practical resources. If you have some
Okay.
background of doing machine learning, say if you can do some basic machine learning using either of these books, now you want to get into, say, cyber security, I would suggest you go to the Kaggle site, look for the malware data set,
Okay, sure.
and related to that, there are certain books that I found, like from Pact publication. I just search with this name, machine learning for cybersecurity.
Machine learning.
Yeah,
Okay.
you will get some books. They are more like a cookbooks, I would say, like how to do these things. Okay, this is a data
Okay.
set. So they will give you some starting point, but you will need to do a lot of heavy lifting in terms of applying it to your specific problem. But they
Yeah,
will
yeah.
give you some starting points. There are 2 or 3 books I found reasonably good, not excellent in terms
Can
of
you name them, please?
machine learning for cybersecurity. Pact publication, if you remember, and go and just
Yeah,
search
yeah,
it.
sure.
you search there, you'll again keep your expectation that it's just a cookbook. You won't get like a lot of, you have to do lot of research on your own, like going through the papers and other places. Yeah.
Sure, sure.
So
Thank you. Thank you very much.
before we take any question, there is
Yeah.
one last.
Mister, there's one question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sir, I'm in first year and I've taken B in AIML. So
Okay.
this is the starting point, sir. I'd like to know, apart from academics, what are the extra activities I need to engage in, and what are the extra skills I need to have apart from academics, sir?
So which branch did you say you're from?
I'm AIML, artificial intelligence and machine learning.
That's
First
the
year.
branch you're in. Okay, awesome.
Yes.
So yeah, so they have, I think, recently started their specializations, I think.
Yes, sir. This is the
Yeah,
first year.
yeah. So I would say for you, if you're develop the strong foundations in mathematics, statistics, probability, right?
Okay.
This is
Okay, sir.
very, very important because you are coming from the academic side and you're like going to through at least 3 years of or 4 years of AIML curriculum. So focus on those subjects. Lot of good material available there. So for you, I would suggest the books the Kevin Murphy's book.
Kevin Murphy. Okay,
Yeah,
sir.
Kevin Murphy's book and Bishop's book, PRML. It's called as Pattern Recognition and Machine Learning. PRML is slightly heavy, but the Kevin Murphy's book is gradually becomes heavy.
Okay.
Don't expect that you will finish that book in a year. Let me tell you. But over say couple of years or period, so you will get a good hang of it. So develop this fundamental. Linear algebra is very important in the first year and second year. Matrix algebra.
Yes.
Learn it thoroughly. Read this book as you start reading the linear algebra course. When life is linear, it's a fun read. Anybody like a lay person could read this book. When life
Okay,
is
sir.
linear, this will give you, okay, why are you studying matrix algebra, where it is applied, and how it is
Okay.
connected to machine learning and so on. So we will.
Okay.
So this is what I would basically recommend you, and read latest. Get may not be in first year, but maybe slowly get into the hang of reading research papers, because
Okay, sir.
that's where the most of the action would be happening. And keep an eye on conferences, present in the conferences, come up with new methods, work with your supervisor, guide, and basically start putting in some journals, and basically you would know then which is if your area of interest is vision, speech recognition, or statistical machine learning, or even theory. I mean, one area I did not mention is a computational learning theory. A lot of excellent research is going on in terms of understanding how the machine learning algorithms learn and generalize and so on. So a lot of things there. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, sir. Thank you so much.
All right. So as a final part, I have this quick demo here. As Saif Bhai just mentioned, more details would be coming in your next session a week from now. But this is just to give you a test. Probably I will share this notebook also. Then probably you can play with it. So Python, like any other is more. You can actually like install Python and on your desktop laptop and play with it. The another and the most common way to get started, especially for the people who are may not be comfortable with setting up, installing, and stuff like that, is a Colab research.google.com. So this is like your hosted cloud environment which provides a Python environment for you. It's absolutely free. You just need a Gmail login. You have to just go to the site and you can write any Python program. You can install libraries. You can play with it.
Can you ping that this URL in the chat?
Sure, sure. Yeah. So I've just shared the Colab chat. I don't think this is a shared one. I will make it shared one, and then you can probably play with it. So it has like its environment. So once you open it, you will say connect. So it will connect with some CPUs running, and there are certain specialized CPUs that it provides, like GPUs that I mentioned, and Google has what you call its own kind of a processing units built, that is TensorFlow processing unit, which is more of optimized parallel processing units. Matplot is a Python library to basically plot your graphics, the charts and so on. So this is a basically a directive to basically inline charts. sklearn, I think next week you're going to learn more about it. So this is like the Hello World program that I'm showing you. Every programming language has this Hello World. So as the Boston is like the Hello World of regression. So it's like a Boston city's housing data, and now we are trying to predict what will be the rent and so on, based on like how many bedrooms it has, area, or proximity to parks and so on. And we will load this data. So this data is loaded. Maybe we could just quickly look at this data, how this data looks like.
Can you share your entire screen?
Oh, it's the screen is not shared. Sorry about that.
Yeah, you're sharing only the PPT, Amir.
Oh, sorry about that. Let me share it again. Okay. How about now?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay,
Sorry
so
about that.
collabresearch.google.
Yes,
Oh.
I have pasted in the chat also. So, and I will share the code also this. So you can just watch for now. So basically, it's basically having the data in terms of what are other things like criminal rates and so on and so forth in that area, and then what's the bedrooms, how many are there, size of the house, and what is the price. So if you can do so. Data visualization is kind of like after data acquisition and cleaning, or even along with that, data visualization is a very important skill. Like you are able to visualize the data, different aspect of it, find anomalies in the data, and so on and so forth. So we can actually look at different parameters like price and criminal rate. So as the crime rates increase, the price goes on dropping. So you can just see from that graph. Then zones and so many other factors are there. You could look at these details and tax and so on. Then this is the simple regression model. So this data is there, which has the price and the house characteristics. First important test part in any machine learning, specifically supervised machine learning, is the train and test split. So you split your entire labeled data into training set and something called as test set. Training set could be your 80% of data or 70% of data, and 30% is the remaining test set. So you build a model, you train a model using a training set. Then once your model is built, you test it. How good is it using the test set? That's the simple idea. So sklearn is a library. We are using the linear regression module from that. So this is the linear regression. Just two commands, lmfit and lmpredict. So lmfit will just use the xtrain. You split the train data, give it train data. Ytrain is the labels, that is the price. And then predict, you just ypredict and you give the x test. And then you plot it. Like this is how the plot. So you predicted true price. So it should be perfectly like a x is equal to y is equal to x line, but you see there are certain variations there. So it's like a true price and what your algorithm is predicting. What is the score of algorithm? So what is the loss or what you can say? I need to run this thing first. So once you build this thing, you just click on run, and then you get a 73% accuracy. That's actually not bad. And there is a cross validation. So you could, instead of dividing your data in just two groups, you could divide it into multiple groups, which is called as cross validation. And then you could check with different buckets of the groups and see what is the maximum accuracy you are getting. It's like 81%. Don't worry if you are not getting all of it. Just try to get the gist of it, what it's trying to do. And then there is another cross validation, slightly better, because you are doing now, instead of just one training and test split, you are doing multiple small training data sets and multiple small test set, and you are tuning your algorithm and you're selecting the best one. The another problem is the classification problem. So this is basically, instead of cats and dogs, I have taken another text-based classification problem. So this is like a news group data. It's like a discussion groups where you have different categories like religion, Christian, space, or computer graphics. So these are the topics, you can say, channels being discussed. And there is this data set available, 20 news group data set. You will fetch that data set. You will basically train this data set using basically you subset this data is using train and test. So let's see. So it basically downloads this data set, which is the text data. All right, and then if you look at this, say I just printed some example. So so this is like some NASA Lewis Research Center, 1-day graphics composite seminar. So some data. This is how actually the data looks like. Now what we will do, we'll create a pipeline. So TF-IDF vectorizer. So again, everything needs to be numbers. Text has to be formulated in numbers in terms of term frequency, inverse data frequency, and what we will use the classifier, which is called as multinomial naive Bayes. So it's based on the Bayes theorem you might remember from your probability. So it's the extension of that. It works reasonably good for this kind of task. So basically, again, 2 steps: model.fit and then predict. So here we are training, giving it the training data and the target. This is the true level. This is the data. So somebody has actually, a real person has labeled this data, right? So let's see. Let's train it quite fast, and now let's predict it on the. Let's test it on the test data and see whether it is able to predict most of the test labels. So if you can see the predicted levels, computer graphics, and it's a 344, it's able to predict, and then size space is like it's some of the computer graphics. It thinks that it's probably space from topic space, because you see the top example I said that's NASA related, but actually they are talking about graphics processing. So that's where this algorithm slightly gets confused for such examples and says probably they are from space category. So that's the heat map. Now let's see predictor, say some this is the predict category. Now we build the function. Now I have given just the text here. Perseverance has landed on Mars, which is like a recent development. And let's see. So it correctly predicts that is from the space category. And now I say NVIDIA introduced a new graphics processor, and I expected it says graphics, but instead of NVIDIA introduces, I say launches. That's another common word. Let's see what it says. It still says it's a graphics processor. Right now, let's say instead of this, let's say chip. Still, it's good. It's recognizing that. Now there are so many estimators or classifiers. So which one to choose when? So this is like a high level kind of you can say. Where did it go? Where did it go? So choosing the right estimator. So this is again from scikit-learn's documentation. So if you have got say more than 50 samples, then what you do? If you got less than 50, then please get more data. Data is very important when it comes to machine learning algorithms and their accuracies and performance. Predicting a category. So if you have got data like whether you want to say predict a category like category A, B, fraudulent transaction, non-fraudulent transaction, for example, give loan, don't give a loan. So is it a labeled data? Yes. It's greater than it's greater than 100,000 samples. Yes, then use something called a linear support vector classifier. If it's a text data, naive Bayes. What we used is one form of naive Bayes, multinomial naive Bayes, like more than 2 categories. Then there is if there's k-nearest neighbor classifier is there. So these are like different algorithms, and then there is like dimensionality reduction. So like how many features you have, that forms the dimensions of it, and that is what the dimensionality reduction is basically the methods like principal component analysis, again from statistics you could do. Within the regression, if you are trying to say predict a quantity like price that we were predicting, so you could use like is greater than 100,000 samples, then few features should be important. So one important step is basically feature selection. So, but that's what deep learning helps us, is you do not need feature engineering. Otherwise, you would need to select, okay, I have this like so much features available, columns available, which are important for my model building. So then you will select this thing, ridge regression or SVM kernel regression and so on. And then the various variant of that. In clustering, if you are doing say unlabeled data sets, then you have mini batch k-means, min shift clustering and so on and so forth. K-means clustering is another popular example. So this is like a high level, you can say a decision chart, you can say, to guide you through it. And now very briefly, I will try to go over the example of deep learning. I will not run it per se, but you could actually, I'll share this link. You could spin up your Google Colab. As you saw, it just took like few seconds. And you could actually say run in Google Colab. Run in Google Colab, and it basically, you would get the interface similar to like this. Let's try that. All right, so this is the Google Colab. So this is the MNIST is basically fashion MNIST. So MNIST, there are many MNIST, but data sets, there's a National Institute of Science and Technology from US. This is the data set from them. So handwritten recognition used to be the very common data set, like for like recognizing whether it's zip codes on a letter or so. But nowadays they have replaced it with this fashion MNIST data set, which basically has different clothes, apparels, in a 28 by 28 pixel images, grayscale images, and they have 10 categories. And basically you load, now this is the TensorFlow that I talked about. So you basically load that TensorFlow. Then you see different categories like t-shirt, trousers, polo, dress, so on. These are the different categories, or as they are called, classes. Then you could basically explore. Data exploration is the first step. Like what kind of data you have, are there like any missing values, right? So that's very important part in your data processing pipeline. You will pre-process the data. Basically you will scale the data between 0 and 1. So the basic RGB values could be 0 to 255. You bring that to basically between 0 and 1. And then basically this is where you actually build the neural network model, where you have this initial layer, flat layer, 28 by 28 pixels that I mentioned. That's your input. Then there is a dense layer of 128 near. So actually it's not a deep neural network. It's a kind of a shallow network, but you can just add more of this, and what you get is the deep neural. So you could just add more of these things and you get a deep neural network. So in the diagram that we saw, we had the sigma activation function. Here they have used ReLU. And then you have final layer dense, which is like a 10 neurons, because we have 10 categories. Then you compile the model. There is an optimizer, because you have to optimize the weights using Adam as the classifier optimizer. There are various optimizers like gradient descent and so on. And then the accuracy. And again, it goes through the same step of model fit. I think somebody was asking me about epochs. So epochs is like you repeat the training process again and again with the data. So basically you are trying, the more the epochs you run, the expectation is that you get the optimal weights. However, after a certain time, actually you do not improve on the whatever the weights that you have learned. So that's why it is not like hard and fast science as to how many epochs should have, but based on the literature and based on your experimentation, you have to come up with this epoch size. Somebody was asking me this question, what should be the epoch? So this is more of an experimentation rather than theory. So again, that is a big difference between neural network and other branches of machine learning. Neural network is more of an engineering science where you try certain things. Whereas, for example, you look at the Bayesian inference and so on, it has beautiful mathematical theory, beautiful mathematics, proof and everything. It doesn't scale that Well, now there are tools coming up, but the point is that there's something called Scruffy. Basically, you try certain things, see if it works, you use it. There is no specific reason why only 10, why not 1,000, why not 100. Theoreticians are trying to make sense out of it, but there is not a lot of that we have right now to tell in terms of what should be that. And batch sizes, again, how many. So instead of training, giving one input and then flowing it through the entire and then doing back propagation, you could actually do it in a batches. It is basically to the speed up. Again, there is no hard and fast rule. 128 batches or so is usually used and recommended. So you could go with that, or whatever that your library recommends. That's good enough. Again, with experimentation, you will have to figure that out if that is what is the most optimal setting for you. And then there is a training loss and test loss and test accuracy. Loss is like how much errors you have made. Difference between the expected and the estimated and the true value, and then it will basically output the predictions for you. And that's basically how the entire thing works. You could just go and run it, this thing. I can just start it off. Just training might take some time, that's why I didn't run it, but it's a straightforward directly from the documentation. Yeah, while I run, any more questions are there? So this is now the training has started. Good. Class names, explore the data. No, that was pulling the data. Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah.
Sir, you were talking about epoch and batch sizes recently. So, is there any dependencies of hardware between epoch and batch size?
So if you are running a GPU like Colab kind of environment, then it doesn't, because it's like one iteration. Like as much as long you have access to this hardware, you could run it, right? And there's no like hard and fast rule. Let me tell you one more thing, if you are interested in how does that impacts the performance. There is something called as early stopping, which is one of the criteria or one of the flag when you are trying to optimize a neural network, as to stop running it, optimizing it after a time. So it will stop there. There is another thing called as a double descent. So instead of doing early stopping, what a few researchers did, they let it continue to run it for many more epochs and so on. They actually observed that instead of dropping further the accuracy, the test accuracy, it actually improved. So actually test loss went further down. So that is the double descent. So this is like came up in like last 6 months or so. So it actually depends on your domain. It actually depends on what kind of experiments you're running, what is your target, that what accuracies are you driving, because you have to normalize also. You cannot just overfit the data, right? What if I run say for thousands of epochs and it gets, because after a point there is a lot of diminishing returns. You don't get a lot of out of it. So that's it. Compile the model. Now here is the training the model. So it's like going to run for 10 epochs. I hope it's fast. Yeah, any other questions?
Hello, sir. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Sir, actually, I'm trying to build a model for the classification of image model using CNN, but I've just started on this, and I have basic knowledge about Python and very brief idea about TensorFlow and Keras. So the reason why I just started learning using tutorials and like hands-on tutorials and like that. Because when I started doing the theoretical thing, I was not able to remember it or understand much of it. So right now the thing is that I implemented 1, 2, 3 models, but I feel like like the model, the layers and all these things, I feel like I have memorized it, but I'm not able to get a feel of it or build my own model myself. So right now I'm unable to. go on learning, like watching more tutorials on this, or should I now switch back to like some theoretical, some course or something like Coursera?
I would suggest that if you want to understand how the things are working, to enough details to basically be comfortable working it, is the Coursera's Andrew Ng's deep learning specialization is there. So I think there is like a second or third course is on CNN, convolutional neural network. If you just follow, I think first week's videos also, you will get a good idea of how the CNN, like convolution, how the convolution works, how what is the strides, what is the padding, and what is the pooling layer. So you will get the very good idea of that. So I would suggest that you go with that and get a hang of it. And since you're already trying it out, I think it would be good enough.
Okay.
Yeah. So here we got the accuracy of 88% with just this small model. So that's the power of a neural network. And this is a shallow in that sense. So 88% accuracy is actually good. Now it's trying to predict, the predictions are there. Now what is the first prediction? The first predicted value is this. Which one has the maximum value is the category 9. What is category 9 for? So maybe some t-shirt or something. We'll see what is that looks like. So probably a shoe or something. This 0th, 12th number is another shoe, and so on. Now it's plotting the images. Now we are using that to plot certain predict a label for certain image. What is that image? Let's see. So it's a pullover, is what it says, because it has the highest probability of being a pullover. Probably 2, that is 0, 1, 2. That's the coding that we have given, hot encoded. So that's the prediction. So I think that's all from my side. Actually, we just basically went through a very high level overview of AI, machine learning and deep learning, and how the various pieces of it fit together. What are the career opportunities? What are the roles, learning resources, and had a very quick demo of it also. I think we are still 5-6 minutes left. So over to you, Saif.
Yeah, Jazakallah, Amir bhai. This was a really interesting session. And even for a fresher who is just stepping into machine learning, it gives so much information and about the technical and non-technical aspects. And yeah, it was really nice. And also thanks a lot to the audience for attending the session and also making it lively with your discussions and queries. So inshallah, we'll keep on having regular sessions like this in future also. And as I mentioned earlier, next week we are going to have a session on scikit-learn that will introduce how to do the coding for machine learning using scikit-learn and Python. So all of you are interested, and you can definitely attend that and learn more about that. And you can also invite your friends, your colleagues, your relatives to these sessions by experts, where we are trying to impart the expertise in hot technologies of today that will help you, help all of us, inshallah. So with this, I would like to we can close the session. Is that all? Is that okay?
Say by 1 second. This is Abdul. I got this invite from some group. I'm afraid I will miss it if I don't look up those group. But is there a way I can register it myself and keep getting those notifications somewhere?
Yeah, we do have a MFIRD group where we post all these postings, and from where that message was redirected to you. So in the chat box, if you can give your phone number or email address.
Okay. Yeah, I'll give my email address.
Okay.
Assalamu alaikum, Saif bhai, and Jazakallah. Saif bhai, I would request that if it is possible and you can find some, it was a really a good session for me, at least, and it was very, very useful. I don't know if it's possible to find, and maybe arrange something like on reinforced learning or reinforcement learning for control problems, something like that, which I don't know if it's possible to, or maybe if you can guide me where to go from here now, and if there are any institutes which can.
Right. So that is the aim of these sessions, because all these information you can get freely on the internet. But the main point is that you get to a contact with an expert.
Yeah.
Today we got a contact with Amir bhai, and you can keep on interacting with him if it is okay with Amir bhai.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Jazakallah, Amir bhai. Okay. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullah.
Okay, let's close this session and have a nice day. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.